over the past 50 years or so, we've seen a shift in the attitude of our political attitude, what we view as possible, what we view as vital to provide to our fellow citizens, and a kind of pullback of the social safety net that was built after World War II, when all sorts of new programs such as Medicare, such as employment insurance, were rolled out. What we saw in the 80s and 90s was a series of rollbacks of the support for those who are most marginalized, the support that people rely upon. So social assistance, for instance, we went from having a system based around providing a safety net to the most vulnerable. As the federal government kind of reduced the amount of money available to the provinces through the 1995 Chrétien-Martin budget, we saw a kind of cascading effect through the provinces, we saw here in Ontario, the Harris Common Sense Revolution, where social services became much more austere, much less focused on supporting people and much more focused on kind of catching fraud, even though study after study says there's very limited fraud. Social assistance rates were cut, and the orientations of the program were less about a safety net and more about getting people, no matter what challenges they face, single parent, disability, into the workforce again, highly punitive, highly surveilled, making sure that no one was stealing a penny. And so this reoriented the systems that the most vulnerable in our society rely upon from one of support, and there were flaws to it. I'm not saying this was, a utopia, but in terms of a trend, from one of support to one of individualism. Yeah. And we see that when we talked about, I think I talked briefly, or maybe I haven't, it's hard to remember, about the More Homes, Build Faster. I think that's close to the name. This is the current Ontario approach that started to erode the green belt around Toronto because, well, if we build more homes, quote-unquote homes, faster, everybody will have a place to live. That's the assumption, right? Yeah, and what's interesting about that is there is that kind of, okay, let's just build on the green belt, let's get as many home built as possible, as quickly as possible. But when you dig into the legislation, you also see some very, and the green belt, we can get into all that, but the point I want to make is when we dig into the legislation, we see things like it limiting the amount of affordable housing a municipality can require of a developer. By law. By law. The provincial government is saying, Hamilton, Kingston, whoever, you can only require 5% of a building to be affordable housing, and you can only require it stay affordable for 25 years. And oh, by the way, we're going to make a definition of affordable that's 80% of market, which for many people is not affordable. And what's interesting, what this reveals, I think, is that not just this idea that, okay, we're going to let the private sector just build, and that's going to solve our problem, but a hostility built into that type of policy to any attempt to have a sort of public response to such a dire crisis as the housing crisis. So housing built according to human need, that's sort of tossed out the window in this approach, right? Yeah, and it's taken away from even municipalities that would say, hey, we want to do a little bit of it, require something like 10%. They're saying, no, the only solution of that has to be the kind of private sector solution. The idea that we could have a kind of social responsibility that then becomes manifested in government policy is something that over successive decades has been eroded. And it's not just something that's happened right now specific to this act, but a trend. Yeah, it's the logical extension of this trend. To what extent, then, do you think these kinds of measures are set up to hide what some people, myself included, might call market failure? the market fails to provide decent shelter to everyone who needs this basic human needs. If you rely on the market, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because markets fail, but my supervisor from when I did my dissertation, Dr. Jamie Peck, would say markets always fail forward. Because we believe, so we have this ingrained belief that a market can deliver something, that if it fails, then the solution must actually be more markets. We have to find a way to make the market work. So,
sort of like a cascade effect?
Well, if you think about what, build homes more faster, whatever we're calling this thing is, the idea here is, okay, we have a market-led solution or a market-led housing system, but it's not delivering. So what we need is even more markets, even less restriction, even less emphasis put on, requiring affordable housing. Or in some of the other areas I study, one of the projects I'm studying is Canada has this program called a social finance fund. The Liberal government has put $755 million behind it. And what that program is okay, we're running short on money for funding social services. There's increasing inequality in our society. There's lots of need. Maybe we can find a way for private finance to invest in social services. And so we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to get your local charity, your local nonprofit, to find a way that they can reorient their service to create a stream of money that can then pay back a loan that they would get from a private investor.
So this is sort of market thinking, sort of worming itself into the guts of a public system, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And with that, could you compare that to Canada's the constant refrain we hear with respect to the healthcare system? We can't have privatization of the healthcare system. Is it part of the same trend, do you think?
That we can't have it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. We can talk about healthcare, and I think if it would be okay with you, I'd also like to talk about libraries, because I think libraries are really interesting. Because could you imagine if we didn't have libraries yet, and someone came out and say, hey, we're going to have these buildings across all of Canada, and we're going to give books away for free, and we're not going to charge anyone, and you know what, we're not going to means test, so you don't have to have a low income to get access to these books. Anyone can come in, anyone can use this space.
It would seem like it would be this complete revolutionary idea. Everybody. We have 1 minute left, Dan.
Oh,
but you've just hit the right button for me, because I'm a big supporter of libraries. Yeah. And it's the ideal metaphor, figure of speech, symbol. Everybody contributes a bit to this thing, and everybody equally can take advantage of this thing. And perhaps, Dan, that is something that a kind of thinking that if we return to it, then we'd have a better housing system.